The scream cut through the evening air like broken glass. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a muffled plea from somewhere down the block, swallowed by the hum of traffic and the distant bark of a neighborhood dog. The kind of sound you could ignore if you wanted to. The kind of sound people ignore every day. Marcus Bennett heard it as he stepped out of his sedan, briefcase in hand, tie loosened after another 12-hour shift at the firm. The October air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of burning leaves and someone's dinner cooking 3 houses down. He paused on the sidewalk, keys dangling from his finger, listening. There it was again. A girl's voice, young, desperate. "Please, someone!" It came from the direction of the park, 2 blocks over, where the street lights flickered and died in patches, leaving pockets of shadow that seemed to breathe. Marcus glanced toward the sound, then down at his watch. 7:43. He had promised Janet he'd be home by 8. Their anniversary dinner was waiting, probably cold by now, and he could already hear the disappointment in her voice. He took a step toward his front door. The scream came again, sharper this time, laced with terror. Marcus stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked back toward the park, toward the darkness gathering between the trees, and felt something twist in his chest. Not quite guilt, not quite fear. Something older. Something he'd learned to silence years ago. "Not your problem," a voice whispered in his mind. "Call the police. Let them handle it." His hand moved to his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. But he didn't dial. Instead, he stood there on the sidewalk, caught between 2 choices, 2 versions of himself. The practical man who knew better than to get involved in other people's chaos, and the man he used to be before the world taught him that some people weren't worth saving. The voice came one more time, weaker now, fading into the October wind. "Help me!" Marcus's fingers curled around his phone. He looked at his house, warm light glowing in the windows, safe and familiar, then back toward the park. The shadows waited. The silence pressed down like a weight. He made his choice. He walked toward his door, turned the key, and stepped inside. Behind him, the scream dissolved into nothing. The door clicked shut. 3 weeks later, Marcus Bennett would stand in that same park, under those same flickering streetlights, staring down at yellow police tape and a chalk outline on the pavement. He would feel his knees buckle. He would hear a detective say words that shattered his world into pieces too small to ever put back together. And he would remember this moment, this exact moment, when he chose not to listen, when he chose to walk away. But that comes later. For now, the evening air is still, the park is quiet, and Marcus Bennett pours himself a bourbon in his study, trying to forget the sound of a girl screaming for help he never gave. What he doesn't know yet, what none of us know in the moments that define us, is that some choices don't stay buried. Some choices come back. And when they do, they bring everything we tried to leave behind in the dark. Marcus Jonathan Bennett was not a cruel man. That's important to understand. This isn't a story about a monster. It's about something more common, more insidious. A man who had simply learned to look away. A man who had spent 47 years building walls between himself and other people's pain. He was a senior partner at Whitmore & Associates, a mid-sized law firm in suburban Cleveland that specialized in corporate defense. His office sat on the 14th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a judge's bench. He drove a German sedan. He wore Italian suits. He had a mortgage on a 4-bedroom colonial in Shaker Heights, the kind of neighborhood where lawns were manicured and children rode bikes without helmets because danger felt like something that happened elsewhere. To his colleagues, Marcus was respected. To his neighbors, he was polite but distant. To his wife, Janet, he was reliable, present but not quite there, like a photograph of someone she used to know. They had been married for 24 years. They had one daughter. Her name was Alicia. She was 17 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She played violin in the school orchestra, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, and had just been accepted early admission to Howard University. She was the kind of girl who laughed loudly at bad jokes, who cried during commercials about rescue dogs, who believed, despite everything the world tried to teach her otherwise, that people were fundamentally good. Marcus loved her the way fathers love daughters when they're too busy to show it properly. With pride, with worry, with a distant affection that assumed there would always be more time. On the evening of October 17th, the evening Marcus heard the scream and walked away, Alicia was upstairs in her bedroom, headphones on, scrolling through college dorm decor on her laptop. She had no idea her father had just come home. She didn't hear the front door open and close. She didn't know that somewhere, 2 blocks away, another girl's life was being torn apart in the darkness. She was safe. For now. The first crack in Marcus's carefully constructed world had come 7 years earlier, though he never spoke about it. It was a case, one of dozens he handled that year, but this one had stuck to him like smoke in his clothes. A negligence lawsuit against a manufacturing plant accused of dumping chemicals into a stream that ran through a low-income neighborhood, predominantly black, predominantly forgotten. The residents claimed the water had made their children sick. They had hospital records, testimonies, photographs of rashes and tumors, and coffins too small. Marcus had been assigned to defend the company. He did his job. He was good at it. He found inconsistencies in the medical reports, cast doubt on the environmental studies, suggested alternative explanations. Poverty causes illness, he argued. Poor nutrition, lack of access to health care. Could anyone really prove the water was to blame? The company won. The plant stayed open. 6 months later, a 9-year-old boy from that neighborhood died of leukemia. Marcus saw the obituary in the paper one Sunday morning over coffee. He stared at the child's face, bright eyes, missing front tooth, football jersey, and felt something cold settle in his chest. He never mentioned it to Janet. He never went back to that courtroom. But something had changed in him after that. Some door had closed. He stopped asking questions about the cases he took on. He stopped reading the follow-up articles. He learned to see people not as individuals with stories and suffering, but as variables in an equation. Plaintiffs, defendants, risks, liabilities. It was easier that way. Safer. The world was full of tragedies, and he couldn't carry them all, so he learned to carry none. October 17th was a Wednesday. Marcus had spent the day in depositions, a contract dispute between 2 medical supply companies, the kind of tedious corporate warfare that paid his salary and numbed his soul. He'd skipped lunch, survived on black coffee and antacids, and left the office at 6:30 with a headache pressing behind his eyes like a slow fist. The drive home took 40 minutes. He listened to a podcast about financial planning for retirement, letting the droning voice fill the silence. By the time he pulled onto his street, the sky had faded to that deep October blue, the color of a bruise just beginning to heal. That's when he heard it, the scream, and made the choice that would define everything that came after. Inside the house, Janet was setting the table for their anniversary dinner. 24 years of marriage, a milestone she'd marked with reservations at Marcus's favorite steakhouse. Reservations he'd forgotten about until she'd called him that afternoon to remind him. He'd promised to be home by 8. It was now 7:45. Close enough. She heard him come through the door, heard the familiar sound of his keys hitting the bowl in the entryway, his briefcase thudding onto the bench. She waited for him to call out to her, to apologize for being late, to remember what day it was. Instead, she heard the clink of glass against glass, the study door closing. She stood in the dining room, candles lit, table set for two, and felt the familiar weight of disappointment settle over her shoulders like an old coat. Upstairs, Alicia took off her headphones and heard her parents' silence pressing through the walls. She'd learned to read that silence years ago, the way some people read weather patterns or tea leaves. It meant her father was home but not present. It meant her mother would smile and pretend everything was fine. It meant another dinner of polite conversation and unspoken resentment. She put her headphones back on and returned to her laptop. Outside, the October night deepened. In the park 2 blocks away, someone's daughter lay in the dark, bleeding and broken, waiting for help that would come too late. And in his study, Marcus Bennett finished his bourbon and poured another, trying to forget a sound that had already begun to haunt him. Not your problem, he told himself. Someone else will handle it. Someone else will care. He almost believed it. The call came at 2:15 in the morning. Marcus woke to the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand, a harsh mechanical buzz that dragged him up from sleep like a hook in his chest. Beside him, Janet stirred but didn't wake. He grabbed the phone, squinting at the screen's harsh light. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something, instinct, paranoia, the lawyer's reflex to never miss a call, made him answer. Hello? Mr. Bennett? A woman's voice, professional, measured, the kind of voice trained to deliver bad news without breaking. This is Officer Sarah Chen with Cleveland Metro Police. I'm calling about your daughter Alicia. The world stopped. Everything, the bedroom, the darkness, the sound of Janet breathing beside him, contracted to a single point. His daughter's name in a stranger's mouth at 2 in the morning. What happened? His voice came out wrong, too high, too thin. Is she? She's alive, Mr. Bennett. She's at Metro General, but you need to come right away. The phone slipped in his hand, slick with sudden sweat. I don't understand. She's home. She's upstairs. Sir. The officer's voice hardened, just slightly. Your daughter was found approximately 40 minutes ago in Riverside Park. She's been injured. I can't give you more details over the phone. How quickly can you get to Metro General? Marcus was already out of bed, stumbling in the dark, reaching for clothes. Beside him, Janet sat up, suddenly awake, eyes wide with the kind of terror that needs no explanation. 20 minutes, Marcus said. 15. We're coming now. He didn't remember hanging up, didn't remember getting dressed or waking Janet or finding his keys. The next thing he knew, he was in the car, speeding through empty streets, running red lights, while Janet sat beside him with her hands pressed over her mouth, making sounds that weren't quite words. She was home, Janet kept saying. She was in her room. I heard her music. The window, Marcus said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. She must have climbed out the window. They'd grounded her 2 weeks ago for missing curfew. She'd been angry, defiant, insisting she was old enough to make her own choices. They'd argued. She'd slammed her door. And then she'd climbed out her bedroom window to meet friends, or a boy, or just to taste a few hours of freedom. Riverside Park. The words echoed in Marcus's mind as he drove. Riverside Park. 2 blocks from their house. The park with the flickering streetlights and the patches of shadow. The park where, 3 weeks ago, he had heard someone screaming. The park he had walked away from. His hands began to shake on the steering wheel. Metro General's emergency room was a fluorescent nightmare of harsh light and chemical smell and people moving with urgent purpose through swinging doors. Marcus left the car running in a no-parking zone and ran inside, Janet close behind him, both of them scanning the crowded waiting room with wild eyes. A police officer approached them immediately. Tall, Asian American, with kind eyes that had seen too much. Officer Chen. She'd been waiting for them. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett? She guided them away from the crowd toward a quieter corridor. Your daughter is in surgery right now. She's stable, but... Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. She's been assaulted, severely beaten. We found her unconscious in the park around 1:30. A jogger called it in. Janet made a sound like something breaking. Marcus couldn't breathe. The corridor tilted. He reached for the wall to steady himself. Was she... He couldn't finish the question. We don't know yet, Chen said quietly. She's being examined now. I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett. I know this is... Who did this? Marcus's voice was a roar suddenly, echoing off the hospital walls. Who the fuck did this to my daughter? Chen's expression remained neutral, professional. We're investigating. We're pulling security footage from the area, interviewing potential witnesses. When Alicia wakes up, we'll need to talk to her about what she remembers. Right now, the priority is making sure she recovers. When, not if. Marcus clung to that word like a lifeline. Can we see her? Janet whispered. Once she's out of surgery, the doctor will come find you. Chen handed Marcus a business card. In the meantime, I need to ask you both some questions about where Alicia was tonight, who she might have been meeting, any recent conflicts, or... She snuck out, Janet said numbly. We grounded her. She climbed out her bedroom window. Oh, God, this is our fault. We should have... She collapsed against Marcus, sobbing. He held her, feeling the tremors run through her body, his own eyes dry and burning. This is my fault, a voice whispered in his mind. 3 weeks ago. The scream. I could have... No. He shut the thought down immediately, viciously. It was impossible. It couldn't be connected. That was a different night, a different girl, a different... Mr. Bennett? Chen was watching him carefully. No, Marcus said. His voice sounded far away. No, just tell us when we can see our daughter. Chen held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded and walked away. Marcus and Janet stood in that fluorescent corridor, holding each other, while doctors and nurses rushed past and machines beeped, and somewhere, behind heavy doors, their daughter fought to stay alive. The surgery took 4 hours. Fractured skull, broken ribs, collapsed lung, internal bleeding. The doctor, a tired woman in blood-stained scrubs with silver streaks in her hair, delivered the list of injuries in a flat, clinical voice, the way someone might read a grocery list. Marcus listened and felt each word like a hammer blow. She's going to survive, the doctor said finally, and Marcus heard Janet sob with relief. But the head trauma is significant. We won't know the full extent of the damage until she wakes up. There could be cognitive issues, memory problems. The next 48 hours are critical. Can we see her? Marcus asked. 5 minutes. She's sedated, and she's going to look... The doctor paused. She's going to look bad. Try to prepare yourselves. Nothing could have prepared them. Alicia lay in the ICU bed, barely recognizable. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, bruised purple and black, one eye completely shut. Tubes ran from her mouth, her arms, her chest. Machines surrounded her, beeping and hissing, keeping her alive through sheer mechanical will. Janet collapsed into a chair beside the bed, reaching for Alicia's hand, the only part of her that seemed undamaged, and held it like she could pull her daughter back from the edge through touch alone. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway. He couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stare at his daughter's broken body and hear, echoing in his memory, the sound of a girl screaming for help 3 weeks ago. Please, someone, help me. Had that been her? No, impossible. Alicia had been home 3 weeks ago, safe in her room. But the dates blurred in his mind. Nights ran together. Could he really be sure? Could he swear, absolutely, that his daughter hadn't been the one screaming while he walked away? Sir? A nurse touched his arm gently. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine," Marcus said automatically. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He would never be fine again. Dawn came slowly to the hospital, gray light creeping through the windows like an apology. Marcus sat in the ICU waiting room, staring at nothing. Janet had fallen asleep in the chair beside Alicia's bed, her hand still clutching their daughter's, her face streaked with dried tears. Officer Chen returned at 7 a.m. with coffee and a notepad. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, sitting down across from him, "I need to ask you some questions now." Marcus nodded, too numb to protest. "When did you last see Alicia before tonight?" "Yesterday evening, around 6. She was in her room." "And you didn't check on her before you went to bed?" Shame burned through him. "No. We thought she was upset about being grounded. We wanted to give her space." Chen made a note. "Did Alicia mention any plans to meet someone? A boyfriend? Friends?" "No, she's been—" Marcus paused. "Different lately. Distant. Secretive. We thought it was normal teenage rebellion." "Any recent conflicts at school? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt her?" Marcus shook his head. "Alicia's popular, well-liked. She doesn't have enemies." "Everyone has someone who doesn't like them," Chen said, not unkindly, just factual. "I need you to think carefully, Mr. Bennett. Any strange cars in your neighborhood? Anyone paying unusual attention to your daughter? Any threats, even jokes that seemed off?" "No, nothing. He stopped, something nagging at the edge of his memory. "Wait." Chen leaned forward. "What?" "There was—" Marcus struggled to articulate the thought. "About a month ago, maybe more, Alicia mentioned something about a guy, someone who'd been following her home from the bus stop. She said it was probably nothing, but it made her uncomfortable." "Did she describe him?" "White, middle-aged, drove a blue pickup truck." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "I told her she was being paranoid. I said she should take a different route if it bothered her." Chen's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes. Judgment or pity. "Anything else?" Marcus opened his mouth to say no, to end the interview, to protect himself from the question that was burning a hole in his consciousness. Instead, he heard himself say, 3 weeks ago, October 17th, I heard something." Chen's pen paused on the page. "What did you hear?" "A scream. Coming from Riverside Park. It sounded like—" He could barely force the words out. "It sounded like a girl calling for help." The waiting room seemed to contract. The air went thin. "What did you do?" Chen's voice was very quiet now. "Nothing." The word fell like a stone. "I thought about calling 911, but I didn't. I went inside instead." "You didn't report it?" "No." "Why not?" Marcus looked at her, this stranger, this woman whose job was to judge and dissect and determine culpability, and told her the truth he'd been hiding from himself. "Because I didn't want to get involved." Silence. Chen closed her notepad slowly. "Mr. Bennett, do you know if there were any other assaults reported in Riverside Park on October 17th? "I don't know. I never checked." "I will." She stood. "I'll be in touch." She walked away, leaving Marcus alone with the terrible arithmetic forming in his mind. October 17th. A girl screaming. Him walking away. 3 weeks later. His daughter in the ICU, beaten nearly to death in the same park. Different nights, different girls, but maybe, the same monster. And if he had called for help 3 weeks ago, if he had done something, anything, would that monster have been caught before he got to Alicia? Marcus put his face in his hands and felt something break open inside him, a wound that had been festering for years suddenly exposed to light. The security footage arrived that afternoon. Chen called Marcus into a private room and showed him the grainy black-and-white video on her laptop. "This is from a camera at the park entrance," she said. "October 17th, 7:47 p.m. Marcus watched. The timestamp in the corner read 1947:23. The park entrance materialized on screen, the iron gate, the gravel path leading into shadow, the streetlights flickering like dying stars. At 1947:31, a figure appeared. A girl, young, African-American, walking quickly, glancing over her shoulder. Behind her, keeping distance but definitely following, a man in a dark jacket emerged from the right side of the frame. The girl broke into a run. The man followed. Both disappeared into the dark section of the park where the cameras didn't reach. At 1948:15, a sound. Chen had enhanced it somehow, pulling it from ambient noise. A scream. Distant but unmistakable. "Please, someone!" Then silence. Marcus felt his vision blur. "Is that—" "No," Chen said gently. "This isn't Alicia. This is a different victim. Her name was Jasmine Torres. She was 16. She survived, barely. She's been in a coma for 3 weeks." The room spun. 2 nights ago she woke up. Yesterday she gave us a description of her attacker and helped us create a composite sketch. Chen turned the laptop screen toward Marcus. "Do you recognize this man?" The sketch showed a white male, mid-40s, with a thin face, receding hairline, and cold eyes. Generic enough to be anyone, specific enough to trigger something in Marcus's memory. "I don't know," Marcus said. "Maybe. I'm not sure. We believe he's been hunting in Riverside Park for at least 2 months. Jasmine was his 3rd victim that we know of. Alicia was his 4th. Chen's voice remained professional, but Marcus could hear the anger underneath. If someone had reported the attack on October 17th immediately, we might have caught him that night. We had units 2 minutes away. The words hung in the air like an accusation. "This isn't your fault," Chen said finally. "The only person responsible for these crimes is the man who committed them. But I need you to understand something, Mr. Bennett. Silence protects predators. Every time someone hears something and does nothing, they give evil a little more room to grow." Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't defend himself, because she was right.
"We're going to catch him," Chen continued. "Jasmine's testimony gives us a solid lead. We've got DNA evidence from multiple crime scenes. And now that Alicia's case is connected to the pattern, we can allocate more resources. But I need you to think, really think. Is there anything else you saw or heard that night? Anything that might help us?" Marcus closed his eyes and forced himself back to October 17th. The scream, the darkness, his car parked on the street. And then, "A truck," he said suddenly. "There was a blue pickup truck parked near the park entrance. I remember because it was in a no parking zone, and I thought about calling it in, but you didn't." "No." Chen was already typing. "Make and model. Old, maybe a 90s Ford Ranger, faded blue, rust on the wheel wells. License plate. I didn't see it, I'm sorry." "It's something." Chen closed her laptop. "We'll review all available footage from that area, see if we can spot the truck and get a plate number. This is good, Mr. Bennett. You might have just given us the lead we need." But Marcus didn't feel good. He felt hollow, gutted. Because even if they caught this man, even if justice was served, it wouldn't change the fundamental truth. He had heard someone dying and chosen not to care. He had walked away. And 3 weeks later, his own daughter had paid the price for his apathy. Alicia woke up on the 3rd day. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a slow flutter of eyelids, a confused moan, her hand twitching under Janet's fingers.
"She's waking up," Janet called out, and nurses flooded the room, checking monitors, adjusting tubes, speaking to Alicia in soft, encouraging tones. "Alicia, honey, you're in the hospital. You're safe. Can you hear me?" Alicia's eyes opened, one still swollen nearly shut, the other bloodshot and unfocused. She tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented it. Panic flashed across her face. "It's okay," the nurse soothed. "We're going to remove the tube now. Just stay calm." The process was brutal to watch. Alicia gagged and coughed, tears streaming down her bruised face. Finally, the tube came free, and she sucked in a ragged breath. "Mom?" Her voice was ruined, barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Janet was crying, kissing Alicia's forehead, her hands, anywhere she could reach. "You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine." Marcus stood at the foot of the bed, unable to move, unable to speak, just watching his daughter's battered face turn toward him with confusion and pain, and something else, something he couldn't quite name. "Dad?" He made himself step closer, made himself take her hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. We're both here." "What happened?" Alicia's eye struggled to focus. "I can't remember. Everything's blurry." The doctor had warned them about this. Head trauma often caused memory loss around the incident, sometimes temporary, sometimes permanent. "You were hurt," Janet said carefully, "in the park, but you're safe now. That's all that matters." "The park?" Alicia's brow furrowed. Was I meeting someone?" "Do you remember sneaking out?" Marcus asked gently. "No. I remember being grounded, being angry at you guys, but then—" She trailed off, frustrated. "Nothing. Just darkness." "It's okay," the doctor interjected, shooting Marcus a warning look. "Memory often returns gradually. Don't force it. Just rest." But Marcus needed to know, needed to understand. "Alicia, do you remember anything about the person who hurt you? Anything at all?" "Mr. Bennett," the doctor said sharply, "not now." But Alicia was already shaking her head. "There was—" She paused, straining. "A voice. A man's voice. He said something." "What did he say?" "He said, 'No one's going to help you. No one ever does.'" Alicia's eye filled with tears. "And then I screamed. I screamed so loud, but nobody came." Marcus felt his knees buckle. He gripped the bed rail to keep from falling.
No one's going to help you. No one ever does. Had Jasmine Torres heard the same words 3 weeks ago while Marcus walked away? "Dad?" Alicia was looking at him strangely. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he lied. "I'm just glad you're alive." But he wasn't fine. And somewhere, in the broken places of his daughter's memory, in the darkness where trauma lived, he knew the truth was waiting. He had failed to save someone. And now, someone had nearly killed his child. Maybe that was justice. Maybe that was karma. Or maybe it was just the universe showing him what it felt like to be helpless, to scream into the void and have no one answer. The arrest came 5 days later. Officer Chen called Marcus at 7 a.m. We got him. Marcus was in the hospital cafeteria nursing his 4th cup of bad coffee when his phone rang. He answered on the first ring. "Say that again." "We caught the man who hurt Alicia, and Jasmine, and the others." Chen sounded exhausted but satisfied. "The blue pickup truck you described? We found it on traffic cam footage from October 17th. Ran the plates, led us straight to him." "Who is he?" "His name is Robert Keller, 46 years old, unemployed, lives alone in a trailer park about 8 miles from Riverside Park." Chen paused. "He has a history, Mr. Bennett. Assault charges, stalking. He served time for attempted rape in 2008. The system let him out, and he went right back to hunting." Marcus closed his eyes. "What happens now?" "He's in custody. We have DNA evidence linking him to all 4 victims.
Jasmine Torres identified him in a lineup this morning. He's not going anywhere. Chen's voice softened. I wanted you to know. I thought you deserved to hear it directly. Thank you, Marcus said. But the words tasted like ash. Because Robert Keller being in custody didn't erase what had happened. Didn't erase Marcus's choice to ignore a girl's scream. Didn't erase the 3 weeks Keller had walked free because no one had cared enough to call for help. Mr. Bennett, Chen said quietly, what you did, remembering that truck, it made the difference. You helped us catch him. I should have helped sooner. Maybe, but you helped when it counted. A pause. That has to mean something. After Chen hung up, Marcus sat in the cafeteria for a long time, surrounded by the quiet sounds of people eating breakfast, having conversations, living normal lives. And he thought about Robert Keller, sitting in a cell right now, probably wondering how his luck had run out. He thought about Jasmine Torres, waking from a 3-week coma to learn her attacker had struck again. He thought about Alicia, upstairs in the ICU, remembering in fragments the night someone tried to kill her. And he thought about the man he'd been, the man who walked away, the man who chose comfort over conscience. That man was gone now. In his place stood someone new, someone hollowed out and filled with terrible clarity. He understood now what Officer Chen had meant. Silence protects predators. Every time someone hears something and does nothing, they give evil a little more room to grow. He had given evil room to grow. And evil had grown until it consumed his daughter. Alicia came home 2 weeks later. The house felt different, wrong, like a stage set someone had built to resemble their life but hadn't quite gotten the details right. Everything was where it should be, but nothing felt real. She couldn't remember sneaking out, couldn't remember walking to the park, couldn't remember Robert Keller's face, his hands, his voice. The doctor said it was a mercy, trauma buried deep. Maybe it would stay buried. Maybe that was better. But Alicia wasn't the same. She startled at sudden sounds, refused to be alone in a room, slept with the lights on. Sometimes Marcus would find her standing at her bedroom window, now locked, now monitored, staring out at the street with an expression he couldn't read. "What are you thinking about?" he asked her once. She didn't look at him. "I'm wondering if anyone saw, that night. If anyone heard me screaming and just didn't care." The question was a knife between his ribs. "I don't know," Marcus said quietly. "But if they did, they have to live with that choice every day." "Do you think it would matter to them? Do you think they'd even care?" Marcus wanted to lie, wanted to tell her that of course people would care, that humanity was fundamentally good, that no one could hear someone suffering and simply walk away. But he'd been that person. He was that person. "Some people care," he said finally. "Some don't. The world isn't as kind as you think it is, Alicia." She turned to look at him then, and in her eyes, still bruised, still healing, he saw something that broke his heart. She saw through him. She knew. Not consciously, maybe, not with proof or evidence or certainty, but on some deep level she understood that her father was a man who could walk away from someone's pain. "I used to think you were brave," she said softly. "When I was little, I thought you were the bravest person in the world. Alicia. But you're not, are you?" There was no anger in her voice, just observation, just truth. "You're scared of everything. That's why you work so much, why you never get close to anyone, why you built this perfect house in this perfect neighborhood and pretend that walls can keep out the world." Marcus couldn't respond, couldn't defend himself, because she was absolutely right. "I don't blame you for what happened to me," Alicia continued. "That's not your fault. but I'm starting to understand that you're not the man I thought you were." She turned back to the window. Marcus stood there for another moment, then quietly left the room. The trial was set for January. Robert Keller pled not guilty, despite overwhelming evidence. His public defender, a tired man with compassionate eyes who hated his client, advised against it, but Keller insisted. He wanted his day in court. He wanted to make the girls relive it. Marcus attended every preliminary hearing, sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching Keller shuffle in wearing an orange jumpsuit and chains, studying the man who had nearly destroyed his family. Keller was unremarkable. Average height, thinning hair, pale skin marked with faded tattoos. The kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The kind of man who could disappear into crowds, into parking lots, into shadows. The kind of monster who looked like everyone else. During one hearing, Keller turned and scanned the gallery. His eyes landed on Marcus and held there for a long moment. No recognition, no remorse, just flat, empty calculation. Then he smiled. It was that smile, small, knowing, cruel, that made Marcus understand something fundamental about evil. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't theatrical. It was mundane, ordinary. Evil was a man in a courtroom, smiling at the father of a girl he'd tried to kill, because he knew that no punishment could match what he'd already accomplished. He'd stolen something from Marcus's family that could never be returned. Innocence, safety, trust. The smile said, "I win no matter what happens to me." Marcus felt his hands curl into fists, felt rage surge through him like electricity, hot and cleansing and dangerous. For one terrible moment, he understood how people became vigilantes, how the law could feel like an inadequate tool against someone who deserved so much worse than a cell and 3 meals a day. But then he thought about Alicia, thought about Janet, thought about who he wanted to be versus who he'd been. And he forced his hands to relax.
The prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman named Michelle Santos, sharp, relentless, with a reputation for taking on difficult cases and winning them. She met with Marcus and Janet in her office 3 weeks before the trial. "I want to be honest with you," Santos said, hands folded on her desk. "This is going to be hard. Keller's attorney is going to try to discredit the victim's testimonies. He'll claim the DNA evidence is circumstantial. He'll argue that consensual encounters turned violent, that the victims are lying, that there's reasonable doubt. It's going to be ugly." "Will Alicia have to testify?" Janet asked, her voice tight. "That depends. Her memory loss complicates things. Without her direct testimony about the attack, we're relying more heavily on Jasmine Torres and the physical evidence. But if Alicia remembers anything, any detail at all, it could be the difference between conviction and acquittal." Marcus watched Santos carefully. What are the chances he walks? Santos didn't sugarcoat it. "With the DNA evidence and Jasmine's testimony, 80% conviction. But that 20% keeps me up at night. Juries are unpredictable. All it takes is one person who doesn't believe women, one person who thinks these girls were asking for it, one person who values reasonable doubt over reasonable judgment." "So what do?" Janet asked. "We prepare. We build the strongest case possible, and we hope that 12 strangers see Robert Keller for what he is." Santos's jaw tightened. "A predator who belongs in a cage." After the meeting, Marcus and Janet sat in the parking lot in silence. "I can't lose him again," Janet said finally. "I can't watch that man walk free." "He won't," Marcus promised. But even as he said it, he felt the weight of all the promises he'd broken, all the times he'd chosen convenience over courage. What if this was another one? What if justice failed? What if Robert Keller really did walk out of that courtroom and back into the world, free to hunt again?
That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He went back to the neighborhood by the chemical plant, the one with the poisoned water and the dead children. The one he'd defended in court and then erased from his memory. The drive took an hour. He arrived after dark, rolling slowly through streets lined with small houses, chain-link fences, and cars with expired registration tags. The neighborhood looked worse than he remembered, more desperate, more forgotten. He parked near the stream, the one the plant had used as a dumping ground. In the dim light, he could see trash caught in the reeds, oil sheening on the surface. Marcus sat there for a long time, engine running, heat blasting against the December cold. He thought about the boy with the missing front tooth, the obituary he'd seen over coffee. He thought about all the cases he's won by convincing himself that other people's pain wasn't his responsibility. He thought about the man he'd been 3 months ago, hearing a girl scream and walking away because it was easier than getting involved. And he thought about Alicia standing at her window, asking if anyone had heard her screaming. Yes, he thought, someone heard. Someone always hears. They just don't always care. But he cared now. Too late, maybe. Too late for Jasmine Torres, who's lost 3 weeks of her life to a coma. Too late for the other victims whose names he didn't know. Too late for the boy who died of leukemia while Marcus collected his paycheck. But not too late to change. Not too late to become someone different. Someone who heard screams and run towards them instead of away. Someone who understood that silence wasn't neutral, that inaction was a choice, that every time you walked away from someone suffering, you gave evil permission to flourish. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed an email to his senior partners at Whitmer & Associates.
Effective immediately, I'm resigning from all cases involving corporate defense in environmental negligence and personal injury matters. I can no longer represent clients whose business models depend on externalizing harm to vulnerable communities. Please consider this my 60-day notice. He hit send before he could reconsider. Then he drove home through the dark, feeling lighter than he had in years. The trial began on January 14th with 6 inches of snow on the ground and a wind that cut through clothing like a promise of nothing good. Marcus and Janet sat behind the prosecution table, holding hands so tightly their fingers went numb. Alicia had chosen not to attend. The thought of being in the same room as Keller made her physically ill, but she'd written a victim impact statement to be read if he was convicted. The courtroom filled slowly. Journalists, curious onlookers, victims' advocates, and in the back row, Marcus noticed a woman around Alicia's age, her face a patchwork of fading bruises. Jasmine Torres, the girl who had survived to tell her story. When Robert Keller was brought in, Jasmine didn't look away. She stared at him with such intensity that several jurors noticed, marking him, refusing to let him disappear. The trial lasted 8 days. 8 days of testimony, evidence, expert witnesses. 8 days of Jasmine Torres on the stand, describing in unflinching detail what Keller had done to her, how he'd followed her into the park, how he'd grabbed her from behind, how he'd beaten her until she stopped screaming. "I thought I was going to die," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. "I thought no one would find me. No one would care." Keller's defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, suggested she'd been engaging in sex work, that the encounter had been consensual until a price dispute, that her injuries were exaggerated. Jasmine didn't waver. "He hunted me," she said simply, "like an animal, and he would have killed me if someone hadn't found me." The DNA evidence was irrefutable. Keller's genetic material at all 4 crime scenes. Skin under Jasmine's fingernails, hair fibers, blood. The defense argued contamination, coincidence, reasonable doubt. Santos systematically dismantled every argument. On day 6, Marcus was called to testify, not as a victim's father,
not as a witness to violence, but as someone who had heard and done nothing. Santos walked him through October 17th, the evening, the sound of screaming, his choice to walk away. "Mr. Bennett," she said gently, "if you had called 911 that night, what do you think would have happened?" "Objection," the defense attorney called. "Speculation." "Sustained," the judge said. But the jury had heard the question. They'd seen Marcus's face as he answered. "I think Jasmine Torres would have been rescued that night instead of lying in a coma for 3 weeks. I think my daughter would never have been attacked. I think 3 other girls would still be safe. I think my silence gave a monster time to hunt." "Objection." "Mr. Bennett," the judge said sharply, "please confine your answers to what you directly observed." But it was too late. The truth was out there now, hanging in the courtroom like smoke. Marcus stepped down from the witness stand and returned to his seat. Janet squeezed his hand. Across the aisle, Robert Keller watched him with that same flat, empty expression. And Marcus stared back, refusing to look away. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Marcus and Janet waited in a victim services room, with bad coffee and worse lighting. Janet paced. Marcus sat motionless, running through every possible scenario. Guilty. Not guilty. Hung jury. What would they do if Keller walked free? How would they explain it to Alicia? How would they live in a world where monsters could smile in courtrooms and go home for dinner? At 4:47 p.m., Michelle Santos opened the door. "They're back," she said.
The walk to the courtroom felt like drowning. Everything moved in slow motion. The bailiff's voice, the jury filing in, Keller standing to hear his fate. "On the charge of attempted murder in the case of Jasmine Torres, how do you find?" "Guilty." Janet's sob echoed through the courtroom. "On the charge of attempted murder in the case of Alicia Bennett, how do you find?" "Guilty." 4 counts, 4 victims, 4 guilty verdicts. Robert Keller's face didn't change. He simply nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already known. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks out. Keller was led away in chains. Marcus watched him go and felt not relief, not joy, not even satisfaction, just exhaustion. The kind that settles in your bones and makes you realize how much energy it takes to carry guilt, how much lighter you feel when you finally set it down. Sentencing day came on a Tuesday morning, with sunshine so bright it felt obscene. The courtroom was packed. Victims' families, advocates, reporters, everyone wanted to see the monster put away. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with gray hair and no patience for nonsense, read through Keller's prior convictions with barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Keller, you are a danger to society. You have shown no remorse, no rehabilitation, no capacity for change. The only question before this court is whether you will ever walk free again." She sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. 160 years. Keller would die in prison. When the gavel fell, Marcus heard Jasmine Torres crying behind him. Tears of relief, of survival, of finally being heard. Then Michelle Santos approached the bench. "Your Honor, several victims have prepared impact statements." "Proceed." Jasmine went first. She spoke about the 3 weeks she'd lost to unconsciousness, the months of physical therapy still ahead, the nightmares that woke her every night, but also about her determination to reclaim her life, to refuse to let Keller take anything more from her. "You tried to make me disappear," she said, looking directly at Keller, "but I'm still here. And every day I keep breathing is another day you lose." 2 other victims spoke. Then Marcus stood, holding a letter from Alicia. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper.
"My name is Alicia Bennett," he read, "and I don't remember the night Robert Keller tried to kill me. But I remember what came after. I remember waking up in a hospital, unable to recognize my own face in the mirror. I remember learning to walk again, to feed myself, to exist in a body that still carries his violence." Marcus paused, his throat tight. "But I also remember something else. I remember the person I was before, someone who believed people were good, who trusted the world, who walked through parks without fear. That person is gone now. Robert Keller killed her as surely as if he'd succeeded in stopping my heart." A tear slid down Marcus's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "So when people ask me what justice looks like, I tell them the truth. Justice is him dying alone in a cell, forgotten and unmourned. Justice is me living, surviving, thriving, refusing to let his cruelty define my story. I will not be his victim. I will be his failure." Marcus folded the letter carefully. "That's what my daughter wanted you to hear," he said to the judge. Then, turning to Keller, "And she wanted you to know that you didn't win. You never will." Keller's expression finally changed, just for a moment, a flicker of something that might have been rage, or frustration, or the dawning realization that his power had been an illusion. Then he was led away, and Marcus watched him go, feeling the weight of 3 months pressing down on him like stones. Spring came to Cleveland like a question mark, tentative, uncertain, as if the world itself wasn't sure whether hope was warranted.
Marcus stood in his study, the same study where he'd poured bourbon 3 months ago and tried to forget a girl's scream, and looked at the photographs on his desk. Alicia at graduation, Alicia at recitals, Alicia smiling before the world taught her that smiles could be stolen. She was healing, slowly, not all the way, maybe never all the way, but she was alive. She was here. That had to be enough. The front door opened. Janet came in carrying grocery bags, calling out to him that she'd picked up the ingredients for his favorite meal, a peace offering, an attempt at normal. They'd been in couples therapy for 6 weeks now, working through the resentment, the blame, the unspoken accusations that had built up over years of emotional distance. It was hard work, painful work, but they were trying. That had to mean something. Marcus walked out of his study and helped Janet with the groceries. They moved around the kitchen together, not quite synchronized, but not quite separate either, something in between. Alicia called, Janet said. She wants to come over for dinner this weekend. Bring a friend. That's good. That's progress. She sounded happy, really happy. Marcus smiled. She's stronger than we are. She gets that from you, Janet said quietly. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he wasn't strong, that he'd failed in every way that mattered. But then he remembered Officer Chen's words. You helped when it counted. That has to mean something. Maybe strength wasn't about never falling. Maybe it was about getting back up, about learning from failure, about becoming someone different, someone better when the world gave you a second chance. That evening, Marcus drove to Riverside Park. He hadn't been back since the attack. The place had become a crime scene in his mind. Yellow tape and chalk outlines, a geography of trauma. But now the yellow tape was gone. The park was just a park again. Families walking dogs, joggers passing through, children on swings. Life continuing. Marcus walked the path Alicia had taken, tried to imagine her final moments before memory failed her. The fear, the realization that no one was coming. He walked to the spot where police had found her, marked now only by his knowledge of coordinates on a police report. And he stood there in the fading light, listening. A dog barked.
Traffic hummed. Somewhere a child laughed. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But Marcus understood now that safety was an illusion, that violence was always possible, always lurking, always waiting for good people to look away. The question was what you did with that knowledge. Did you retreat into fear, build higher walls, convince yourself that if you just stayed quiet and kept your head down, the monsters would pass you by? Or did you stand in the darkness and refuse to let it swallow anyone else? Marcus pulled out his phone and called Officer Chen. "Mr. Bennett," she answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything all right?" "I want to do something," he said. "I want to help. Not just my family, other people, other victims. I have resources, I have time, and I need to do something that matters." A pause. Then, "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet. A foundation, maybe. Something that supports victims of violence. Something that helps people who fall through the cracks. Something that ensures when someone screams, someone answers." He could hear the smile in Chen's voice. "I think that's a good idea, Mr. Bennett. A very good idea. I also want to volunteer with victims' advocacy groups, crisis hotlines, whatever needs doing. I've spent too many years defending people who profit from others' pain. I need to do the opposite now. I'll send you some information. There are a lot of organizations that would be glad to have you." After they hung up, Marcus stood in the park for a few more minutes, watching the sun set behind the trees. He thought about Jasmine Torres, rebuilding her life piece by piece. He thought about Alicia, learning to laugh again despite everything. He thought about all the other Jasmines and Alicias out there, the ones who'd screamed into darkness and heard nothing back, the ones still waiting for someone to care. And he made a promise. Not to the victims he'd failed, not to the universe, not even to himself. To the next person who would need help. "I will hear you," he promised, "and I will come running." 6 months later, on a warm October evening, Marcus and Janet attended the dedication of a new emergency response station near Riverside Park. The Bennett Family Crisis Center. Funded by Marcus's substantial donation and his lobbying of other wealthy families in the community. Staffed 24/7 with counselors, advocates, and direct lines to emergency services. A safe place where anyone could come, anytime, and find help. Alicia cut the ribbon. She stood in front of the crowd, stronger now, steadier, her scars mostly hidden, but her strength impossible to miss, and spoke about the night someone tried to take everything from her. "I don't remember most of it," she said, "but I remember the feeling of being alone, of screaming and having no one answer, of thinking that I didn't matter enough for anyone to help." She looked at Marcus then, really looked at him, and he saw forgiveness in her eyes. Not complete, not unconditional, but real. "My father taught me something this year," Alicia continued. "He taught me that we all fail, we all make mistakes. We all turn away from hard truths because it's easier than facing them. But we can choose to do better. We can choose to become people who run toward screams instead of away from them." She smiled. "This center is proof of that choice. This is proof that even our worst moments can become something meaningful, something that saves lives." The crowd applauded. Marcus wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide the tears. After the ceremony, Jasmine Torres approached them. She'd been invited as a guest of honor, one of the first beneficiaries of the center's counseling services. "Thank you," she said to Marcus, "for this, for everything." "I should have helped you sooner," Marcus said. "I'm sorry." "You're helping now," Jasmine squeezed his hand. "That's what matters." As they stood together, 3 people connected by trauma, bound by survival, determined to ensure no one else suffered alone, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not redemption, exactly. He didn't deserve that. But purpose. The understanding that every life mattered. Every scream deserved an answer. Every person in pain deserved someone to stand with them. And if he spent the rest of his life trying to make up one moment of apathy, one choice to walk away, well, that seemed like time well spent. That night, Marcus lay in bed beside Janet, listening to her breathe in the darkness. "Do you think she's okay?" Janet whispered. "Really okay?" "I think she's getting there," Marcus said. "She's braver than either of us. She learned that from you." "No," Marcus shook his head. "She learned it from herself, from surviving, from refusing to let what happened define her." They lay in silence for a while. Then Janet said, "I'm proud of you, for what you've done, what you're doing." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I'm just trying to be someone worth being proud of." "You are." He wanted to believe her, wanted to forgive himself the way she seemed willing to forgive him. But forgiveness wasn't something you could demand or even earn. It was something you had to accept as a gift, if it came at all. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows. Inside, Marcus closed his eyes and thought about all the people who'd screamed into darkness, hoping someone would hear. And he made a silent vow to be that someone. For Jasmine, for Alicia, for every person who ever felt alone, forgotten, abandoned. He would hear them, and he would never walk away again. So here's the question I want you to consider tonight as you sit there in the safety of your home, surrounded by everything familiar and comfortable. What would you do? If you heard someone screaming for help, not on TV, not in a movie, but in real life, in real time, would you call for help? Would you run toward the sound? Or would you convince yourself it's not your problem, not your responsibility, not your business? Because here's the truth that Marcus Bennett learned the hard way. Silence isn't neutral. Inaction isn't harmless. Every time we hear suffering and choose to look away, we give evil a little more room to grow. We like to think of ourselves as good people, people who would help, people who would intervene, people who would stand up for what's right. But the test isn't theoretical. It's that moment when your phone is in your hand and someone is screaming, and you have to choose between comfort and courage. Most of us fail that test, not because we're cruel, but because we're human, because we're tired or scared or convinced that someone else will handle it. Because the world has taught us to protect ourselves first and worry about others later. But here's what I've learned from stories like Marcus's, from survivors like Jasmine and Alicia. Every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples. Every time someone chooses to help, to speak up, to refuse to look away, they change the world just a little. They prove that evil doesn't get the final word, that silence can be broken, that someone is listening. So the next time you hear something that doesn't sound right, that makes your instincts scream even as your mind tries to rationalize, trust those instincts. Make the call, send the text, run toward the scream instead of away from it. You might save a life. You might save your own soul. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it challenged you to be better, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel, not for me, not for the algorithm, but as a commitment to yourself, a reminder that you're someone who listens, someone who cares, someone who refuses to let other people suffer in silence. Because these stories matter. The voices that get silenced, the truths that get buried, the injustices that flourish in darkness, they all matter. And the only way we shine light into that darkness is together. So hit that subscribe button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, the next time you're faced with a choice between looking away and leaning in, choose courage. Choose to be the person who hears, who helps, who refuses to walk away. The world needs more people like that. Be one of them.